anchored in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. On a Tuesday, it's 10:30 on the Eastern Seaboard. We're coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod. As always, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday in this time slot. If you're joining us on Rumble and you have not already, please give us a nice thumbs up on this show and subscribe if your heart compels you to do that. Definitely give us the follow. If you listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, give us a 5-star rating. I saw a couple more got dropped in there with the 5-star reviews. Appreciate that, guys. Helping us to trick the algorithm into radicalizing more Americans on the audio format of the show. And you can always check us out on @XAmericaNews if you prefer the Twitter sphere. All right, today, it's a brand new week. We got a lot to get to today, and by we, I just kind of mean me. I'm just using the royal we. At GOB Actual was traveling over the weekend. He was in our nation's capital delivering an address. I did get proof of life from him. He escaped from District 1, the capital, and is back in his confines, friendly confines of Wisconsin, as he likes to appropriately refer to it as, Nineveh. But he's not going to be on board. It's just going to be at Real Steve Friend in the chair today, going solo on this hobbyist podcast. I do actually have to give you the disclaimer, tongue in cheek and all. I know you appreciate it, AMRADs out there. But this is a hobbyist podcast, not representing any agency, arm, or department of the government. I'm just here as an American expressing my First Amendment right, my opinions on things that are open source information available in the news. I'm allowed to have an opinion. I'm allowed to have an informed opinion, which is what you all come to get today. So today is entitled 1861. And just stick with me, guys. It's going to take a minute to get there, but I think I'll set it up quite nicely. And we'll actually wind up rounding it out with a video from Victor Davis Hanson that will come full circle. That was given to me by George Hill, who was with us last week talking about threats. So it will be appropriately dark, I assure you that. But I want to set it up. On this program, we like to focus in on language. Language is important because language sets up your mindset for things. There's lots of examples we like to use. Start off with baby murder or infanticide. Well, the communist left in this country, they had to devolve that. They had to make it sound more palatable for people to accept so they could kill babies. So baby murder, infanticide, that was evolved into something else. It was termination. But that didn't sound good either because the Terminator is the bad guy. So we should just go with abortion. We're aborting the mission. We're scrapping the whole mission. It never really got off the ground. It wasn't actually a thing. But time goes by and people start to connect the dots, and we have to get to red versus blue, us versus them, white hats versus black hats. So let's just make it pro-choice. But that sets up a problem because pro-choice has to have an opponent, which is pro-life. And being pro-life kind of sounds good. So let's shape the message there. Let's make it pro-choice versus anti-choice. In fact, let's scrap the choices entirely. Let's just call it justice, reproductive justice. We want justice, after all, justice for all. And that's the way the language game works. We see it a little slightly different with other things like cultural appropriation. We are, after all, in October right now. Can you believe it? We're in October. The final quarter of the year is upon us. We are a couple weeks away from Halloween, which this year is on Friday, which will be fun because kids can go out and enjoy their time. I think I should run for president and putting Halloween on the weekend as the top of my platform, and I would probably get everybody in the burbs to vote for me. But cultural appropriation, and I bring up Halloween because it was a few years ago that Megyn Kelly was, I believe, on NBC and was talking about wanting to dress up as Diana Ross. And well, it was cultural appropriation for her to do that. She couldn't do it. In fact, no white kid could ever dress as Black Panther, even if they liked the Marvel movie. But if they don't dress as Black Panther, if Megyn Kelly says, I can't really put Diana Ross on a pedestal, well, that's cultural erasure. So you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, all via language. Hammer it, worth repeating. Democracy. That's just communist speak for things we like. If you don't like what we like, you just don't like democracy. Speech is violence. Violence is speech. If you're saying things we don't like, that's hate speech. In fact, we should pass laws that say that you can't engage in words that give us a case of the bad feels. That's hate speech. In fact, that's tantamount to being violent against me. We should prosecute you for some sort of an assault. But if I punch a Nazi, that's just my free speech. You can't go after me for that. I'm just an anti-fascist. And then it devolves further. And we get to a point where if a communist wants to put pornography on the shelves in a school library and you say no, well, then you're just censoring my speech. So that's sort of a quick trip, wave tips down the memory hole of language. I set that up because, again, language leads to your mindset, and linguistic tricks are a tool of the communist left, and they are going to go into a place in a space about tolerance. Tolerance. And we'll get to the first piece on that in a minute. But if you're able to attack tolerance and reshape it and actually turn it on its head, make it a bizarro version of tolerance, 180 degrees different, well, then that opens up the door for things like institutional attack on citizens that don't engage in right think, only wrong think. So we're going to talk about thought leaders today and politicians and prosecutors and even judges who are institutionally attacking citizens. And they can do it passively or they can do it aggressively. Coming from a law enforcement context, as an analogy, you have a use of force continuum. First, you ask somebody to do something you want them to do. And if they don't do it, then you tell them to do it. And then if they don't, then there's a force continuum. You can't just whip out your pistol and shoot them because you gave them a verbal order and they didn't comply. So there's a force continuum. Well, the levels of force go up as the levels of resistance go up, and you can always meet that force with the appropriate level of force, one level higher, so that you can get compliance. Well, there's passive resistance and active resistance, very much like we're going to have attacks on citizens, passive attacks and aggressive active attacks on citizens coming from our thought leaders, our politicians, our judges, people who we would expect to be our betters, expect to protect us against fraud and force. And passive resistance in a law enforcement context would be somebody who says, I'm doing a sit-in. I'm not going to fight with you, but I'm not going to allow you to just handcuff me. That's passive. You can't beat that person over the head, but you are going to have to be a little bit aggressive with the way you handle them. You manhandle them a bit. Active resistance of somebody who's fighting you. You're going to have to use some less than lethal tools, maybe some pepper spray, maybe you're going to have to tase them, maybe use a baton strike. And then ultimately you get to the use of force. That's the deadly force, but we're not there yet. But we might get there if we get to George Hill and Victor Davis Hanson's perspectives on things. And we have a January 1861 scenario where we're on the verge of a kinetic civil war. All right, so a rundown of what we're going to talk about today. First, a nerdy piece and an explanation of the concept of repressive tolerance, and you'll see it play out throughout the show today. And then some real world, real news examples, because the Supreme Court is actually weighing on a new term, or relatively new term, gender affirming care versus conversion therapy. We'll break that down and how the left has completely flipped those terms on their head so that they can change your mindset and get you to be sympathetic to the cause of mutilating childhood genitals because they have a case of the feels. Some examples of dehumanizing people over immutable characteristics, particularly the color of their skin, but also their politics or their common sense. And then astroturfing violence, encouraging the worst people amongst us to engage in violent actions, and then just stepping back and allowing it to happen, cleaning your hands because you're an elitist communist politician and you can just give everybody a Joker style little bit of a push. We have the court saying that the president can have control of the National Guard, but he can't use them for reasons, I guess. A prosecutor in my state, in the land of milk and honey in Florida, engaging in some passive but bordering on active attacks of its own citizenry, and that's letting some of the worst offenders of state law off the hook because that's what these prosecutors do to raise the temperature, to make the society hate itself, to fight amongst itself. And that's the communist strategy. We have a librarian in a red, blood red area who was putting pornography on the shelves, who is now getting paid out by those very citizens for saying that was a problem because of, quote, free speech. The climate pagans at it yet again. They're saying that asthma patients are less important than the sun monster, and scientists want to take away your meat, but that's not, according to them, a restriction on you. More riots are being planned, and someone is threatening to blow up the Supreme Court. So, a big build up here and a lot to get to. But before we do all that, let's thank the underwriting sponsor on this hobbyist podcast where we're not making a dime, but we are supporting local American business. And let's go to the OG sponsor of the show, which is the True Earth Pharmacy. Everybody should go to trueearth.co. That is trueearth.co. You do not need the M. And when you go there, you can check out what they have in their fertilizer section if you happen to be growing stuff. Maybe you have a garden or a homestead, check out all the extracts that they have, particularly the squid extracts. Or if you just want to get personally healthy, you can check out the store in the pharmacy, spelled with an F because it's clever like that. Go to trueearth.co, click on pharmacy, and I would encourage you all to check out the black turmeric. The black turmeric, which I re-upped on, got my supply, had some family visiting over the weekend. They brought me the supply from Georgia, so I'm good to go for a couple more months now. That'll help with your inflammation. Maybe you got some joint pain. For me, it's the ankle pain. Saw some great results off of that. And when you go to trueearth.co, use promo code AMRAD25, AMRAD25, and that gets you 10% off, and because we're getting healthy in 2025. All right. And let's get to it. First story on the rundown. It's not really a story, but I think it sets up a good premise that we'll see throughout the show. It comes from American Greatness, which is actually doing a summary on another communist write-up, which is all about repressive tolerance, but doing it in a way that it's way less flowery with the language, we'll say. And they just break down like how bad it actually is. So from the piece, which is entitled "The Left's Political Playbook, Redefining Words and Standards." Believing that redefining language will refashion reality, the left weaponizes the language to advance its political agenda, as I've just run down in the intro to the show. So twisted terms and standards are designed to deceive both the general population and the left itself, in short, turning their black hats into white hats in distorted funhouse mirror of their minds. So a couple of terms that are explained here. There is the idea of tolerance. Well, under our constitutional republic, tolerance, or even just the Webster's definition of tolerance, it should be live and let live. Free speech and you don't have to agree. You just have to allow somebody to speak. I mean, you don't even have to listen. There is the mute button that exists on social media, which is supposed to be the digital version of the public square, where we're all able to say what we want. And if you get a case of the bad feels, you don't have to listen. You can just mute, but you do have to tolerate it. You can't outlaw it. But according to the left, and according to this piece again from American Greatness, that's redefined. Actual tolerance, the left calls repressive tolerance. That just means that you're passive and indiscriminate, and you just tolerate. But according to the left, by tolerating all speech, that actually helps to maintain an unjust status quo. By allowing people to say things that offend you, and if you're a communist, that would be anything to the right of Mao, that actually leads to an unjust society. So, in effect, we have to engage in a different sort of tolerance in order to affect the change that the left wants. And what the left wants is, after all, democracy, as they like to call it. So they want to do liberating tolerance. Sounds nice. We want to liberate, but that's not what it actually means. Liberating tolerance is intolerance towards any right-wing movements and policies, and tolerance only to the left. Presently, the left is engaged in such actions and perspectives. So the word doesn't mean what the word means. And I know that that's hard to get your mind around, because you think, aren't we all playing in the same game here? Aren't we all using the same English language? And in effect, we're not. Liberating tolerance means that they're allowed to tell you what to say and what not to say. And if you want or expect in this constitutional republic anybody to allow you to express your positions and maybe fight it out on the battlefield of ideas, no, that can't be allowed to happen because that's going to go in the way of the leftist utopia, which is a communist dream. So now to the stories of the day where I think this is going to play itself out. And stick with me. This is going to be a full-length show, and we will bring it full circle, I assure you. And we'll go to one of the purveyors of liberating tolerance, NPR, which your money is still funding. The Doge cuts weren't necessarily forever. Headline: Supreme Court seems highly doubtful of limits on conversion therapy for minors. And again, let's define our terms, because if you existed in the common sense world, in Realville, I guess, as the late Rush Limbaugh would call it, conversion therapy. Let's just say that I set up what was actually going on and I told you what it was called. If I told you that Harry wants to become a Sally, and I was the doctor that was going to get it into his head that he could do that, or maybe even cutting off the twig and berries myself, you would probably, as someone who engages in common sense, say, well, you're trying to convert Harry into Sally. That would be conversion therapy. That would be right in Realville, but not in the world we live in, and not in the case that's being adjudicated in front of the Supreme Court right now. Because you see, conversion therapy, according to the communist left, which has a monopoly on the way that the English language is used in society today, unfortunately, conversion therapy would be you telling Harry, you might have something going on between the ears. Let's talk it out, because a man can't become a woman. That's just not physically or scientifically possible. So let's work out what the problems are so you can accept the fact that in this world, the real world, you are a man. The left would say that's conversion therapy. In fact, gender affirming care, which in the real world would be you telling Harry you are a man. No. According to the left, gender affirming care is you saying, what you believe on the inside, Harry, is that you are a Sally, and I'm going to affirm that for you. Now, in multiple states, and when I say multiple, a majority of states, that's legal. And it's illegal for you to say, no, Harry, you're a man. You need to stay a man. And that's what the Supreme Court is trying to flesh out right now. So back to this NPR piece. The Supreme Court will hear arguments in this case that is called Childs v. Salazar. It's a case that seeks to undo a major triumph for the LGBTQ plus IA _ tilde hashtag rainbow kamikaze movement, which bans conversion therapy. So banning the practice of telling Harry that you are a man and you should be a man, and we'll work out the problem between your ears. These laws, now on the books in more than half the states, prohibit licensed counselors from attempting to change the client's sexual orientation or gender identity. So man identifies as a woman, you can't say, no, you are in fact a man. Now, fortunately, it appears that just about all of the Supreme Court justices still live in Realville. So Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito, he said that the law at hand here, which comes from Colorado, quote, looks like blatant viewpoint discrimination. That's eminently true. And even Elena Kagan, who is the smartest amongst the communists, said, quote, if a doctor says, I know you identify as gay and I'm going to help you accept that, and another doctor says, I know you identify as gay and I'm going to help you change that, and one of those is permissible and the other is not, that seems like viewpoint discrimination. So points for honesty for Elena Kagan, but as always, the reliable, most retarded member on the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. But for our purposes here, because language is important, Ketanji Jackson, I do not use your surname for your name that you were given at birth if you were married, because the patriarchy always wins. Spoiler for all the girl bosses out there, if you insist on using your maiden name in your name, you're just naming your father. Again, the patriarchy always wins. So Ketanji Jackson, quote, it's just very puzzling to me, I think most things are, that she would stand in a different position than a medical professional who has exactly the same goals and would just be prescribing medication. So from Ketanji Jackson's perspectives, giving hormones out there is fine, and she can't fathom why any other medical professional might disagree. Apparently, she's never heard the term, I want to get a second opinion. Now, there is another element to this that I think is worth going into, and it's a connected case to it. And this piece is relatively recent. It comes from the New York Times, which was at one point a newspaper, but it stems from an older decision from the Supreme Court, and the NPRs of the world and the New York Times of the world are very, very big mad about this. But for at least the time being, sanity should rule the day from this old case, which will play into this new case, this Childs v. Salazar determination on conversion therapy and whether or not the states can outlaw and stop a medical provider from telling Harry that he is in fact a man. Headline: a key precedent overturned limits on professionals' speech. And this dealt with speech. This dealt with crisis pregnancy centers. This dealt with laws that in California forced crisis pregnancy centers to post literature on their walls. In these outlets and these organizations that were all about saving babies, the state of California said, you must put posters on your wall that says, you can always murder the baby, but it'll be more colorfully written than that. And there was a precedent that was established by the Supreme Court that said, no, that's actually an infringement on these crisis pregnancy centers' free speech. So the California law required the centers licensed by the state to post notices that free or low-cost abortions were available to low-income women through public programs. So state coffers, taxpayer-funded abortions were available. You don't have to just live with the baby you created like a superhero inside of you. No, that's going to be a problem for you. Just murder it. But according to the Supreme Court, Justice Clarence Thomas, quote, speech is not unprotected merely because it's uttered by professionals. Professionals might have a host of good faith disagreements, second opinions, both with each other and with the government on many topics in their respective fields. So that's the precedent that is going to go into this case here. So it's boding well that they're actually inclined to overturn this law or say that this law should be scrapped entirely because professionals are allowed to have different opinions as long as they're coming at it as good faith actors, and they're allowed to speak how they want in this country. But you can see the premise being set up originally. I go back to the language game, the conversion therapy. We're having this discussion over a term that in and of itself is bastardizing the English language, and it's setting up the mindset. It's now in allowing these state authorities to not just control your speech because they're dictating what terms you must use, but they're setting up the premise that only one side is correct, and they don't have to even tolerate the other side. So let's move off of state level and let's go to some thought leaders. And I've got some videos here that I want to get to. This is a tried and true, dyed-in-the-wool leftist communist, Ibram X. Kendi, racialist. Man, he hates himself, some white people. But I want to play this video and again get to some of the dehumanizing of people for immutable characteristics. And I'm going to steer clear of the thing that the Republicans love to do, and that's talk about hypocrisy. And can you imagine if a white person had said that? That's not our purposes on this show, not your mommy show, not your cable news show. This is a hobbyist podcast show. I give you the straight dope, my opinions on things, and I'm going to link Ibram X. Kendi's position on whiteness to our conversation for today.
I don't think white people worldwide have really reckoned with how much their own personal identity is shaped by constructions of whiteness, and how much that construction of whiteness prevents white people from connecting to humanity. In other words, recognizing that when you recognize that you are part and parcel of humanity, In other words, you're not over humanity, right? It allows you to really be able to connect to people who don't look like you, who have kinky hair, who have dark skin, and to see yourself in them. And it's whiteness that prevents that.
So let me get this straight from Mr. Kendi, which I do not believe is his actual given name. But in immutable characteristic, the color of your skin, and he never defines whiteness because he has to use white in the definition of it. If I ask you to define what a pencil is and you say, well, it's a pencil, you're not really doing anything. He loves to talk about whites and whiteness and dehumanizing anybody who has a lighter skin hue than his own, because he says they engage in whiteness, which they can't avoid engaging in because of the immutable characteristics of their skin. So why should we listen to what they have to say? In his worldview, if you're white, your whiteness separates you from others and you can't connect to them. You can't connect to other humans. The only way you can actually connect is if you subscribe to Ibram Kendi's ideologies, which is that you're irredeemable if you're white because you engage in whiteness. You see how it's just circular? It doesn't go anywhere except to a place where now he has flipped the script 180 degrees. He actually makes the case that whites view themselves atop all. Not that we're all equal under the law, which is the system of government that we do engage in this country, but according to Ibram X. Kendi, whites view themselves atop of all other humanity. So in order to correct that, he has to dehumanize you and lord himself over you and say that you must subscribe to whatever I tell you to do so that you can be absolved of this great sin. The thought leaders on the left are legion, and I use that word intentionally. Now, Kendi, does he have institutional power? I mean, he's respected by universities. He gets government funding for his studies, which don't do anything other than say things that he has a hard time articulating. He would be unable to sit here on a podcast and stare into a camera lens and articulate his position without just saying white or whiteness every third word. So does he really have the power? Well, he's setting the narrative and he's viewed as a quote unquote expert. So people who are in positions of authority can take that specifically, or even just the theme there, where they don't have to view people who have either immutable characteristics, which they find abhorrent, or even perspectives on politics that they disagree with as human. They can other you, dehumanize you, view you as somebody who's not necessary to take up into consideration. So, let's take it to somebody who is pursuing higher office. There was a recent viral video clip of this interview with Katie Porter, who is running for governor of California. I want to take one particular element of it. I mean, she didn't look very good. Who knows if this is going to destroy her campaign or not? I don't really care what goes on in California, as we'll finally get to at the end here. We probably need to divorce ourselves entirely from these enclaves of communism. But she did mention one thing I think that goes really hand in glove with what Ibram X. Kendi was talking about. Now, at the very beginning, at the outset of this interview, let's give this a play.
You say to the 40% of California voters who you'll need in order to win, who voted for Trump?
How would I need them in order to win, ma'am?
Well, unless you think you're going to get 60% of the vote. You think you'll get 60%. Everybody who did not vote for Trump will vote for you. That's what you're saying.
In a general election, yes. If it is me versus a Republican, I think that I will win the people who did not vote for Trump.
What if it's you versus another Democrat?
I don't intend that to be the case.
So Katie Porter flat out says she doesn't care about anybody in the state of California who voted for the current president of the United States. And because of the population demographics in California, California is actually the most Republican state in the union. If you just look at the pure popular vote, just because of the population, they have the most Republicans of any state in the union. And Katie Porter says, I don't care. I don't need them. I'm not going to appeal to their needs for all the talk about how it's one nation under God. Well, under Gaia, from Katie Porter's perspective. She's not interested in appealing to them at all. She's not interested in reaching across the aisle. She's not going to pay lip service to that because she doesn't have to in California. She's expecting to get a 20-point win for governor if she's the leading candidate for the gubernatorial race. That's a dehumanizing factor. That's not respecting the minority. That's not saying, hey, look, I'm going to not necessarily agree with your perspectives on things, but I'm going to at least appeal to you to see if maybe we can connect on one or two of the top 10 things that are on your list. That's her completely dismissing a large portion of the residents of her state. Talking about 4 in 10 voters. And Katie Porter has said, I don't need you. I don't want you. You might as well not exist. She's dehumanized them because she can pull the mask off there. She feels comfortable doing that. She's not in one of these toss-up purple states where she has to pay lip service to being able to reach out across the aisle and see if we can find some common ground and compromise. No, she can let the veil fully slip. She can actually border on being gleeful at the persecution that she wants to engage in. Now, let's talk about one of those purple states, one of those purple states where they do actually have to pretend to reach across the aisle. But as these communists are aspiring to more and more power, as they've gone further and further into this, they're letting the mask flip down further and further to the point where they're no longer agreeing to reach across the aisle in these purple areas. Now, is there more purple toss-up sort of state than Virginia? Now, the off-cycle elections that Virginia and New Jersey have, it's sort of viewed as bellwether for the way that things are happening at the federal level. So they have the presidential election, and then a year later, Virginia and New Jersey elect a governor. And typically, what happens is there's a giant swing back to the other guy because whoever the losing party is, they show up in mass. They want to send the message that we're going to resist, #resist, and we're going to push back, and they'll put somebody in the governor's office who can resist the president of the United States. We saw that with Glenn Youngkin, and he rode in on that surfboard of the parents at school board meetings, the parents who were concerned about what their kids were being taught during the lockdowns, the parents who are concerned about boys in girls' locker rooms. And the same issue is at play today, but Abigail Spanberger, Democrat, running for governor in Virginia, she's going to go the exact opposite way and not even pay lip service to those parents here, not even really address it and bring up something else, which nobody has talked about, but on the AMRAD pod, we will.
Focusing on a K through 12 school system, should transgender girls who are biological males be allowed to use girls' bathrooms and play on girls' sports teams? You have 60 seconds.
I'm a mother of 3 daughters in Virginia public schools, and nothing is more important to me than their safety and their experience in schools. I'm also a former federal agent, and I work to investigate crimes against children. And so nothing is more important to me than the safety of all of our children. And that work, in part, has earned me the endorsement of Virginia's Police Benevolent Association.
Ms. Spanberger is talking. Please let her finish.
On issues related to what's happening in our schools and each individual community, I think it's important that we have parents and teachers and administrators making decisions about their individual schools, not politicians. And if we are talking about the safety of our children, I would ask why my opponent continues to support efforts to defund public safety.
A couple of things, and one is just sort of an aside. Abigail Spanberger, she claims she works in federal law enforcement and she worked to save children who were being exploited. I'm going to take a little bit of umbrage with that one, Abby, because I went to this great resource here and I was pretty sure about myself, but I wanted to be double sure. So I go to the communist source. I went to the Wikipedia about Abigail Spanberger. In the early 2000s, Spanberger taught English literature as a substitute teacher at the Islamic Saudi Academy in Northern Virginia and worked as a postal inspector, focusing on money laundering and narcotics cases. In 2006, she joined the CIA as an operations officer. Instead, she gathered intel about nuclear proliferation and terrorism. And then she left government service. No point in there did she mention anything in this Wikipedia page, which you know is curated to her benefit, about working on child exploitation. So that's a lie. But to the larger issue where she won't talk about boys and girls' locker rooms. And I've said this in the past. I think that this could ultimately be resolved by a bunch of dads just saying, get behind me, Satan. I don't know why we're having to have these politicians get up there and have this conversation. but I think it's emblematic of our point today, where there's a dehumanizing factor involved here. And then when the people who are positions of power, or at least aspire to get into positions of power, they're not going to protect you against fraud and force. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to dehumanize you. They're going to allow bad things to happen to you. And then we'll eventually get to a spot where they not only actively encourage bad things, but they use the power that they are bestowed by nature of their position that they hold to further that against you. So Abigail Spanberger, she consistently relies on her position in the past as being a member of federal law enforcement to lie if she's doing a debate, and to obfuscate and not actually answer the question, where would you allow dudes who feel pretty in the girls' locker room? She refuses to actually answer. She gives a non-answer. And then she also uses her position, her prior position in government service, to go after your ability to protect yourself against an out-of-control government. So I went back to a speech she delivered on the House floor about the Second Amendment. We'll give this one a play.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today during National Gun Violence Awareness Month. I am proud to represent Virginia's 7th District, and in the Commonwealth, we know far too well the horrors of gun violence that impact our communities. From our universities, to our Walmarts, to our playgrounds, to our walking paths, to our elementary schools. People across our Commonwealth and the rest of the country have been impacted by acts of gun violence that forever change lives. I'm a former federal agent. I used to carry a gun every single day. I know what it is to be a responsible gun owner. And I also know that background checks are proven to help law enforcement keep guns out of the hands of those who pose a danger to themselves and others. And we must ensure that we have background checks on all firearms purchases. And I know that Congress must reinstate a ban on the manufacturing, sale, and transfer of military-style weapons and high-capacity magazines. And I urge Speaker
Gentlelady's time has expired.
to bring these measures forward. I yield back.
So appeal to authority. I was a federal agent. I was a special person. I was allowed to have a gun, but I know that you're not allowed to have that. It's a bad thing for you to have that. Well, why would it be a bad thing for you to have that as an American citizen? We have that pesky Second Amendment. Do we have it for home defense? I mean, yeah, it's secondary. Hunting. I'm sorry, John Thune, Senate Majority Leader, South Dakota, who said that we need guns so he can go shoot prairie dogs on occasion. No. We have Second Amendment to protect yourself against an out-of-control government, to deter an out-of-control government, a government from devolving into an institution that's supposed to uphold our rule of law, our social compact that we have written down in a constitution that affords you civil rights, that guarantees that the government exists to protect those rights, not to infringe on them. But government is, as government does, and it will inevitably seek more power, and it will infringe on those, and it will take that ultimate action and come to your door and tell you what to do. It will dehumanize you in order to do that. And if you don't obey, if you don't comply, if you don't bend the knee, well, then they'll just blast you in the face. And the last best hope we have to resist that is a Second Amendment, which is why the communists fight so hard and are so hard to deprive you of that ability. They're hungering for that. They are Katie Porter licking their chops at the thought of not just ignoring you, ignoring your perspective, not giving you even a crumb, a seat at the table to put your ideas out there. No. We're going to engage in liberating tolerance. We have to actively shut you up. And if you insist on talking, well, we'll take away your ability to defend yourself. That's the next stage. That's the final stage. But before we get there, the stage before the final stage, we get to the people who are in positions of power, who are encouraging others to engage in activity, and then they just Joker style stand back after giving it a little bit of a push. And the clip I want for that is a little bit dated. This is her name is Pramila Jayapal. She's one of the worst. She's one of the worst representatives that we have out there. But points for honesty. She gets as close as she can to telling you just how much she wants to hurt you. And she's willing to let the worst people that we have in the society, broken, psychologically broken, mentally broken, or just flat out evil people, do it to you.
I think of it as getting us strike ready or street ready. And part of that is understanding our own strength. And as we develop that strength, being able to assess our risk tolerance, because we know that risk tolerance increases as the severity of the situation increases and as our own understanding of what's happening increases. So overall, the more we understand what's effective, what the risks are, and who's ready to participate, the more impact we can have.
Strike ready. What kind of impact can they have? Their risk tolerance is going up because they have to fight for democracy, don't you know? So she's going to get the street animals out there to hurt as many people as possible. Now, sort of laid out the way that this is going to go. And let's go to some of the news of the day and see if I'm being consistent with it. Beyond the Supreme Court, because that kind of went in our favor. Let's go to some other bad news that we have on the AMRAD pod. I can't help it. Got to give you a little bit of the black pills because we are nothing if not seeking to be honest and pragmatic about the situation at hand. So from CBS News, this is about the president's ultimate control of national security. An appeals court temporarily blocks the deployment of National Guard troops in Chicago. Now, there was a video here. See if I can pull it up, man. It's going to be, yeah, here it is. This is the news report on that very situation, because apparently, per the judge, the president's allowed to have control of the National Guard. He just can't send them anywhere. Ergo, he doesn't essentially have control of the National Guard.
Hundreds of National Guard troops sent by the president are still in the state of Illinois this morning, even though a federal judge has ruled they should not be there. That judge temporarily blocked them from deploying anywhere in the state after some soldiers turned out to protect a federal immigration facility outside Chicago. This, the latest legal setback in the president's effort to send troops to support immigration enforcement in cities run by Democrats. Ian Lee is still in Chicago and has reaction from there.
This is an important decision, not just for the state of Illinois, but for the entire country.
Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul praised the federal judge's decision Thursday to temporarily bar the deployment of National Guard troops anywhere in the state for 2 weeks. While sweeping immigration raids in the Chicago metro have sparked tense protests,
ice off our streets now!
In a hearing Thursday, the judge says there was not credible evidence the federal government has been unable to enforce the law without the Guard's help. The decision came after soldiers, including roughly 200 Texas Guard members, had already arrived in the area and were seen patrolling the federal ICE facility in the suburb of Broadview. In response, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker wrote in a social media post, "Donald Trump is not a king, and his administration is not above the law."
So you have the governor of the state of Illinois, who is actively, or I guess actively is not the proper word. It's more of a passive attempt to allow the rioting to ensue in Chicago, to allow the violence against law enforcement. He's not doing the Jayapal thing where he's saying we need to get out there and get strike ready and see what our level of fear is of any sort of ramifications or repercussions. But he is going to stand and put the speed bumps up to stop any sort of enforcement of the law. Now, he's doing that from a position of authority as the chief executive of the state of Illinois. He's going to allow lawlessness to happen. And if there's any effort afoot by the federal apparatus to come in and restore peace in keeping with their prime directive, their mandate, their legal obligation to come in and ensure domestic tranquility. I did read that somewhere. They're going to fight back against that. What about the prosecutors, though? Now, I am in the land of milk and honey in Florida. Everything is awesome in Florida most of the time. I mean, it's getting a little bit cold outside nowadays. I might have to start wearing sleeves instead of tank tops when I go for morning runs, but that's a first world problem. But we do have a problem with some rogue prosecutors, and they're not the soft on crime prosecutors as the Republicans love to characterize them. And actually, she will be characterized in the piece that I have prepared. It's a lawless communist who wants the worst people on the streets to hurt citizens because that benefits the communist left in this country, because at the end of it, there's disorder, disarray, and chaos, and that bodes well for them to turn the temperature on up so they can have a fundamental transformation of our system of governance. So a couple pieces straight out of Florida involving the Attorney General and a state attorney. Her last name Worrell. She's near Orlando, and she's letting the worst people get away with the worst crimes for reasons I don't know. But this comes from Florida Voice News. Headline: Florida AG blasts state's attorney Worrell in another case, says that child molester avoided prison under her deal. Now, the specifics of this case, it's from Orange County. Bad guy here's name is Peter Washington, convicted 1995 of attempting to rape a child under the age of 12. Somehow he did not get killed in prison. And then he was arrested again 2023, 28 years later, on 3 new counts of lewd and lascivious molestation of a child. In Florida, for those who don't know, L&L, lewd and lascivious, I mean, that could be actual hands-on. It's sort of a catch-all. But that was of a child over the age of 12, but still a child. Charges filed under Florida's Criminal Punishment Code carry a sentence range of more than 27 years to life in prison for Peter Washington. But state's attorney, Monique Worrell, she gave him 15 years of prison? No, she gave him 15 years of probation. And this is actually the Criminal Punishment Code score sheet that should have assured that Peter Washington went to prison for most likely the rest of his life. But this state prosecutor here, she let him off. Not a day behind bars. Why would she do that? Maybe she just didn't have her morning coffee. Maybe she was distracted. She was really getting into the latest Dark Wolf series on Amazon and just forgot to do her job that day. She's actually been removed from office by the governor and then reelected by the people in that county who I guess want to have child molesters roving around the street. But let's give the benefit of the doubt. Let's give the maximum amount of grace. Maybe this was just a one-off. But wait, it wasn't. Here's again the state's attorney general for Florida addressing Monique Worrell and her failures as a prosecutor.
This is Attorney General James Uthmire. Today, we again highlight another example of State Attorney Monique Worrell's soft on crime policies that are putting the citizens of Central Florida in great danger. A recent case involving a young woman, the victim, occurred after her ex-boyfriend pursued her all day, hunted her down, ultimately finding her in the drive-thru of a Crystal Burger where he opened up fire with a firearm, shooting at her 12 times. Some of these bullets went into the car. One got lodged in the headrest directly behind her head. This was first-degree attempted murder. But State Attorney Worrell pled it down to a second-degree offense without a firearm. She waived the mandatory minimums in the case, overriding the will of our state legislature and their desire to see dangerous criminals behind bars for as long as possible. Now the people of Orlando will be fortunate to see this guy face 10 years behind bars. State attorneys should not be bending over backwards to defend criminals. They should be doing everything in their power to protect our citizens. So again, we call on State Attorney Worrell, do your job, prosecute cases, put violent offenders behind bars for as long as possible so that we can keep our families safe.
It's pretty well said by the state attorney general, other than the soft on crime thing. She's doing it on purpose, but at least she got him in jail, right? I mean, she failed to do that on the next one or two that I have, which is a third adjoining news story to the trials and tribulations, or lack of trials, we should probably say, for Monique Worrell when it comes to prosecuting some particularly awful people. So this is a letter that was drafted by the attorney general, and it summarizes two more cases where Monique Worrell engaged in some pretty sketchy behavior. First one, bad guy. His name is Kevin Chapman, 61 years old, arrested in August for masturbating at a park bench in front of a splash pad where there were children, including a 2-year-old boy. The office of state attorney, Monique Worrell, didn't pursue a pretrial detention, so he was allowed out, and declined to charge him, claiming the case was not suitable for prosecution. Second one, Thomas Dolgos. He was arrested in June. Police executed a search warrant and found dozens of videos showing the rape and sexual abuse of infants and toddlers. Maybe we should get Abigail Spanberger on this one. This was on his laptop. He, according to the letter, admitted to possessing the content depicting the naked children. Now, from the Attorney General's office, they have their own sort of state effort. It's called the Office of Statewide Prosecution. They took authority over the case in June, filed 12-count information, which is an indictment with an enhancement. But before they were able to take control, the state attorney, Monique Worrell, inexplicably dismissed all charges against Thomas Dolgos, and he was discharged from jail. Now, I guess subsequently the state went after and did another search warrant and was able to get more video footage, and they're going to have like 48 extra counts on this guy. But we have an individual who's a pervert masturbating in public in front of children. We have another one engaging in possession of child sexual abuse material. And for whatever reason, the state's attorney near Orlando feels that these guys are appropriate to be put on the streets of Florida. She's doing it to essentially turn up the temperature. It's not actively turning the forces. She hasn't deployed investigators or police forces against the people yet, but failing to protect them against fraud and force is the step before, or maybe an intermediate step between that and when they allow the violent street animals to go out and just pursue whatever lawlessness that they want. Now, that's Florida, which is pretty conservative. But Orlando, they reelected that woman after all. There are these blue enclaves within the land of milk and honey. What about Wyoming? Blood red Wyoming, where they step up to protect their kids against some of the most awful, filthy material that's being put on the shelves. What happens in Wyoming? Well, it appears that a librarian who was fired for refusing to censor, as they title this, 2SLGBTQ+. 2S means two-spirit, because if you're two spirits, you get 2 letters in the acronym of the LGBTQ Rainbow Kamikaze Mafia. She was awarded $700,000 in a settlement agreement from U.S. court. Now, her name is Terry Leslie. She was fired, rightfully so, as a system director in northeastern Wyoming, Campbell County, 2023, 2 years ago, over a book dispute. She was putting some weird stuff on the shelves. Now, that's a coal mining area. It's blood red, one of the most conservative areas of the most conservative states. Public officials there said that the book objectors who raised awareness to what this woman was doing, again, her name is Terry Leslie, the public officials agreed. They wound up firing her, and they said that it was a performance issue, didn't have anything to do with her First Amendment rights. But she sued and won. Now, what were these books? Well, book titles were This Book is Gay, How Do You Make a Baby, Doing It, Sex is a Funny Word, and Dating and Sex, a Guide for the 21st Century Teen Boy. That's what she felt was appropriate to put on the shelves. And she successfully articulated, because of the language bastardization that the communists have done to us, that the public officials and the citizens of that area who had a problem with that and didn't want that material on their publicly funded public library shelves, that was tantamount to an infringement on her First Amendment. You see how once you change the language, you're able to change policy because you change mindset? Now, we talked about some public officials, people in positions elected or appointed, people who are supposed to either pass laws or enforce laws, or maybe even a chief executive who's not going to stand in the gap to protect his citizens, public officials, public intellectuals. What about the experts? The experts, who again are making it very clear that they view you, the plebe, the rube, as less important to their lofty goals of saving the climate. What about them? This comes from CBS, and this one is pretty funny, actually. Headline: Inhalers produce as much carbon emissions as over 500,000 cars each year. Study finds. CBS Health News. This is from their Health Watch, so you know it's really, really expert level. In a study published in the Journal of American Medical Association. So do you think the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, do you think that they support conversion therapy? Oh, they sure do, because they're all about the science. The researchers found that inhalers approved for asthma and COPD generated an estimated 25 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, and that's equivalent to 530,000 gas-powered cars each year. Now, 28 million Americans have asthma, 34 million have chronic lung disease. These cases are expected to grow because of the climate change. So Americans are going to become more at risk of contracting some sort of lung disease, but they can't do anything about it. All they can do is die, not take medication, because certain sacrifices have to be made, right? You can't make an omelet without breaking a couple eggs. So apparently, according to the experts, the ones that believe in conversion therapy, if you have asthma or COPD, just die. That's your sacrifice. We're all in this together after all. And secondly, and this one applies, maybe you don't have asthma, but you do eat, right? Two pieces, DW.com. First, headline: Pass the beans, hold the beef to save the planet. Food production and consumption must change drastically to avoid millions of deaths. Well, hopefully it's not the asthmatics. And, quote, catastrophic damage to the planet. And this comes from another journal, The Lancet, which was one time a respected journal, just like JAMA. Researchers from Lancet Commission said that if people followed what they term the planetary health diet, quote unquote, more than 11 million premature deaths could be prevented, and we could save the climate from all those greenhouse gases. Now, the diet, and pay attention, guys, if you like to eat food, the diet would see adults limited to 14 grams of red meat a day. That's 30 calories. For reference, a quarter-pound hamburger has 450 calories. So 1/15 of a quarter pounder would be what you could have, which is less than one bite of a quarter-pound hamburger. No more than 29 grams of poultry, which around 1.5 chicken nuggets. So you go to McDonald's and say, can I have one bite of a quarter pounder and a chicken nugget and a half? And you'd get 13 grams of eggs, which is 1.5 eggs a week, because you can't have protein. That's bad for the environment. It would be healthier for you and healthy for the planet. And if you have a problem with that, then you are probably just one of these people who is attacking them online, which is the subject of the second piece. Headline is: Online Attacks Threaten Major Climate-Friendly Diet Report. Comes from Martin Kubler, written last week, October 3rd. And this is where we're going to start coming full circle on the experts and what they're actually willing to put out there, because you, after all, the problem, because you want to eat more than one chicken nugget. Despite widespread acceptance widespread acceptance, according to them, of their planetary health diet, there has been, which has been cited more than 10,000 times by them, the message hasn't gone over well, and they can't figure out why. These online communities are pushing back. A new investigation by Changing Markets lays out how, quote, industry-friendly scientists, doctors, and health influencers, journalists, and authors, they all connected with the meat industry because they're all on the take to push people to eat meat in contravention to what the experts at the Lancet say. One bite should suffice you for the week of that burger. But if you push back, you're just a conspirator. And in fact, they deem it to be, quote, dangerous, elitist, and anti-science. Research showed that these misinfluencers, according to them, tagged and shared each other's content. And they used hashtags like hashtag yes to meat and hashtag meat heals. Now, sociologists Jose Bortolucci and Emmanuel Guerin, who's a fellow on the European Climate Foundation, said that Relative freedom of social media has fostered an environment in which climate disinformation has flourished. So, according to the experts, the fellows, and the sociologists, free speech on social media where you say that meat is good for you is a problem. It's misinformation. You're a misinfluencer. That has to be taken in because otherwise, you're not going to engage in their scientifically based, industry friendly, planetary health diet, which will save lives, don't you know? And back to the piece before we close it out. Couple more quotes. Johan Rockström, he's from The Lancet, director of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact and Research. Quote, we all at the Commission share the same concern over this return of mis and disinformation and denialism on climate science. We're not dictating any specific one fit for all type of diet, except when you told us we could only have one chicken nugget and a bite of a burger. It wasn't a same for everybody. You just use your best judgment, according to him, except for everything that they've said. And the other one is from Walter Willett, who is a professor at Harvard. Quote, the picture makes the case that this is not a deprivation diet, except if you want 2 bites of a burger that we're talking about. This is something that could be delicious, aspirational, and healthy, which is liberating, right? It's liberating. It's liberating tolerance. As long as you obey the diet that the professor from Harvard or the scientists over at the Lancet say you can have, it's completely tolerable. It's not a one fit script. You can do what you want. Just do what we tell you to do. So now we've taken the language, we've taken the mindset, and if you speak out against it, that needs to be repressed. Repressive tolerance, after all, can't be abided. If we allow you to just indiscriminately speak about your opinions on eating a steak, well, that's bad for all of us. We have to save the planet. So we need to engage in liberating tolerance and stop your ability to speak out against what we want and stop your ability to say that, hey, you might be a little bit restrictive by telling me that I can only have 1 egg for the week. And now we're getting to the final stages. We're getting close to the active encouragement by government actors for the worst amongst us to engage in violent activities. I mean, they're setting the groundwork. They're allowing them to be on the streets. And now we're seeing the step back, give them a little push and see if we can't get them to riot. Because who remembers those riots that happened in Los Angeles? The No Kings riots? We're going to get part 2. This comes from Los Angeles Magazine. Headline, No Kings Day protests planned across the nation to oppose the Trump administration. We're going to run it right back, guys. A series of No King Day demonstrations are set to take place nationwide Saturday, October 18th, which will be this weekend. The protests are organized as a response to what activists describe as the Trump administration's increasingly authoritarian tactics, unlike tactics that say you can have a chicken nugget for the day, or tactics that say that we can't have law and order. The president, he can have the National Guard, but he just can't tell them what to do. Or maybe someone running for governor who says that law enforcement can have a gun, but you can't. Or maybe another elected official that says, let's just allow the people to get strike ready and protest, maybe like at a No Kings rally. Remember those No Kings rally? Yeah, I do. It was just mostly peaceful. There wasn't a whole lot of property damage or anything. It didn't necessitate a response from law enforcement. It wasn't like the cops were pulled away from addressing 911 calls to deal with some of these ridiculous street animals that wanted to tear up property and cause hundreds of millions of dollars of property damage. Or was it? This comes from an AP. Just as a reminder, this is what No Kings looks like. That's just free speech. No violence at all. No violence. Well, violence is speech, and speech is violence, if you ask a communist. All right, we're getting towards the end. Got a couple more to go. Headline from the Daily Wire, because we're just short of the elected officials telling the worst amongst us to engage in activity, or even using the powers that they have, the police at their disposal, to go against federal authorities for trying to enforce federal law, or maybe you because you happen to be a misinfluencer. Well, we had somebody try to blow up Supreme Court justices when they were at church. That was a story that was kind of lost in the shuffle. This comes from the Daily Wire. Headline: Man with 200 explosives and leftist manifesto was arrested outside of the Supreme Court event at a church. That's according to the police. Washington, D.C. police on Sunday arrested a man with hundreds of explosive devices outside a church holding a mass in honor of the Supreme Court. He had a manifesto. His name was Louis Jerry. He was occupying a green tent on the steps of the church. Police attempted to clear the area in preparation for the event, and he told the police, quote, "You might want to stay back and call the federales. I have explosives." Well done, Louis. Points for honesty. So with a lighter in one hand, he handed them 9 pieces of paper that were his manifesto, and it was entitled Written Negotiations for the Avoidance of Destructions of Property via Detonation of Explosives. So at least he wasn't trying to blow it up, at least according to his manifesto. He had over 200 bombs with him, and the manifesto revealed his significant animosity towards Catholics, members of the Jewish faith, members of the Supreme Court, and ICE and ICE facilities. So you can see how now the crazies have been weaponized. They've been deputized to go out and do the crazy things, do the violent things. And if you have a prosecutor like Monique Borrell, there's not going to be any ramifications. We are just at the precipice of having elected officials not just allow things to happen or to kind of encourage it like Jayapal's, but to use their forces that they have at their disposal to go against you for your perspectives on things. And then we're going to have an armed standoff very much like we had in 1861. I told you I'd get there. I told you I'd come full circle. And I can't do as good a job as Victor Davis Hanson does because he's a historian and he's really smart and he's got a cool hat on his head. So let's let him explain it to us.
There's been a lot of news lately about the efforts of the Border Patrol and the Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE. I want to remind everybody how that works out in reality. In many cities, there is organized resistance. But what's really disturbing is we're starting to see a new, I would call it a neo-Confederate secessionist ideology in these cities. The officials who run them, the mayors or the police chiefs, believe there are a law unto themselves. Sometimes it's very violent by Antifa or encouraged by the Democratic Party. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom or Governor Pritzker of Chicago. They can nullify all federal laws. And when we get to that point, we're really on the verge of civil insurrection, just in the way that South Carolina on the eve of the Civil War.
Well, that doesn't sound good. It is well said, though. I think it makes a lot of sense. We're sort of being pit at each other's throats when, if you actually look at the raw numbers, people tend to agree on a lot of the things that we're fighting about. It's just not represented the right way because people in positions of power like to use leverage points, and they like to maybe shape the way their language works so that you get confused and you have people who are just kind of toss their hands up and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I just want to be nice. I just want to get along. But I want to actually marry Victor Davis Hanson's perspective on being on the verge of a kinetic civil war in which you have governors, very much like they did in the 1860s, who are standing up against federal authorities and were actually using the police forces at their disposal for essentially a blue-on-blue situation where you're going to have state police firing at federal ICE officers or National Guardsmen. For what? Because they have to protect Illinois' ability to allow illegal aliens to roam free? Has Governor Pritzker or Governor Newsom actually taken a lick of their finger, put it in the air, and seen where most people stand on things? Or are they all kind of like Katie Porter and say, I don't need your help. I don't want your perspective. You're not even human to me. Well, there was a recent study done, and I'll just throw up the image. It's a Harvard-Harris poll. And it sort of cites where Democrats, independents, GOP, and then writ large people stand. And there's the top issues that we have the most agreement on, I think are worth putting out there. Well, 82% of people want to work to bring drug prices down. Not really a issue that's getting people into the streets. But the second most agreed upon issue, where it is close to 7 in 10 Americans. Well, if Katie Porter was running, she would need to worry about 7 in 10, right? It's 69%. I'm sorry, 78%. 78%, almost 8 in 10. Deporting immigrants who are here illegally and have committed crimes. Just the violent ones, really. Almost 8 out of 10 people say that that's actually what they stand for. Undertaking full-scale efforts to eliminate fraud and waste in the government. The Doge stuff. Remember how we had those elected officials standing out front and saying, we will not be displaced here. They're going to stand at the lectern and protect the USAID money laundering scheme, where the CIA was essentially sending money out to foreign entities and NGOs. Well, 75%, 3 out of 4 people in this country want that curtailed. We agree on a lot of stuff in this country, and yet here we are, and I think rightfully so, on the precipice of a kinetic civil war where elected officials or appointed officials in positions of power in blue enclaves will not just allow the worst out onto the street, not just stand back and stand by as they engage in lawless behavior and harm the citizenry, not just encourage that lawless behavior, but use those forces against people that are in the majority on most of these issues. Which leads me to my concluding point on the day. And I'll give probably more time to this in a subsequent issue of the episode of the AMRAD pod. But I think it's worth an idea to just percolate in your mind. We have a president in this country who made his bones on being the deal maker, the art of the deal. That's Donald Trump's shtick. In any negotiation, the ultimate leverage is the ability to push back from the table and say, no deal. If you're not willing to do that, you're at a disadvantage. If you go in to buy a car, you have to be willing to say, this is my budget, this is the number. If that salesman comes back and it is a response to my bid and it's more than I can afford, you have to be willing to walk away, or you're going to lose the negotiation. Now, I think we exist in a time where our social compact is broken and we are effectively negotiating a peaceful divorce. That's where we're at. We have to be willing to walk away from the table. And when I say walk away from the table, I mean, instead of going in hard, instead of using the National Guard, which the judge has already said that the president has but can't use, doesn't make any sense. Maybe instead of saying, let you enforce that, judge, I'm coming in hard anyway. Maybe we should do the 180 degrees different, the bizarro version, the photo negative. Maybe we do withdraw everything. Illinois, y'all can choke on it. California, you can have it all. We're going to pull every single federal entity out of your states. Not just ICE, FBI, courts, which you could easily defund. How about Health and Human Services, the VA, any federal resource that is going to any person in those states, they lose. And they can vote with their feet. And that's going to involve a lot of pain because, as I said before, California has the most Republicans of any state in the union. You're going to force their hand, or at least force their hand to go to the ballot box and vote against Katie Porter en masse. And you'll probably get some of the other side to do the same thing because they're advocating for these policies that are resulting in a loss of welfare benefits or just public services. What if we do that? What if the interstate just stopped being serviced in Colorado, which declares itself to be a sanctuary state? What if the Department of the Interior just says, you know what, Minnesota, you can have it. We're not going to provide any federal officers to Native American land. Let's see how long that lasts. I don't know. It's food for thought. I mean, something that I've had some discussions with. I had a discussion with George Hill over it when he sent me that Victor Davis Hanson video, and we had a sort of a longer conversation and fleshed out these ideas. It's something I've been considering over the last few days. Haven't come to a complete conclusion, but it's something I wanted to put out to the AMRAD pod audience for their consideration. Love to hear your perspectives on it. Throw it in the comments. Let me know what you think about it. Because at the end of it, go back to the chart that I threw up. We kind of agree on a lot of stuff. We don't need to be that close to a kinetic civil war, to a kinetic engagement. So in the vein of actually walking away, separating, pushing away from the table, let me give us our biblical worldview for the day, and then I will send you off with a nice palate cleanse. I'm going to go to the gospel, Matthew chapter 10, verses 14 and 15. And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when ye depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. Verily I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Maybe it's time to kick the dust off our sandals and walk away from these areas. And that could be the only way we could avoid the kinetic engagement that Mr. Hanson was cautioning us all about. And on the subject of today's nice palate cleanse, just kind of off the board, I found a fun way to prank your wife if she tends to be the types that's the Blue Falcon. You know what I'm talking about if you're in the military, law enforcement. The Blue Falcon types that fall asleep on road trips while you're trying to traverse the landscape and use that interstate highway that hopefully has funding on it because you don't live in California or Minnesota or Colorado or Illinois. If she falls asleep and you get this opportunity, it's probably worth it.
Finally got you. Yes. That's so dumb.
That is dumb, but it is funny. I don't know how Madam Friend would appreciate that one. She tends to try to stay awake with me, but not always. So just as a caution, my dear, if you happen to do watch the AMRAD pod, as you should, as everybody should, on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 10:30 here on rumble.com/AMRAD pod, you are on notice. I might have to just give that one a try. All right, we've reached the end, guys. We'll be back with you on Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time, with a special episode, just looking over the horizon. Got a nice interview set up with Margaret Roberts, author of Blowback, which is a story about the Oklahoma City bombing and how it might have been an entrapment scheme. It's going to be a fun one, I promise. Make sure that you bookmark it. Make sure you're with us on Thursday. And if you can, get a copy of the book early to start reading it. And if not, you can read it after because she's got a great story to tell. And we'll be there Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time. Until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/AMRADPod.